Hey everybody, this is Kevin and welcome to another build series. This time we're going to be building the Estes Yankee rocket, which if you've been in rocketry for any length of time, you have no doubtedly heard of the Yankee. It's been around since 1982, which is when it made its first debut in the Estes catalog. And as you can see, the color scheme has changed slightly with the same colors, but it was basically just an all red bottom with an all blue top with nothing more than a white decal wrapped around the center that divided the two colors. Then in 1993 we have what we see in this color scheme here, where you've got the white bottom with the red stripes, and they've also eliminated the star decal on the fins. The other major difference is in 93 or 94 the nose cone changed from being balsa wood to plastic. As in the old days, you had to sand down the nose cone to get the right shape that you wanted to match the rocket. And starting in 93 or 94, a little hard to tell when, they started implementing the new plastic pre-shaped nose cone. And that's what we have today. The design has stayed the same since 93 or 94 till present day. The only other thing of interest I note is if you look back at the catalog in 1982, it says that the rocket will achieve flights of over 2,000 feet. And they had the highest motor rating as a C67. And here, they're still showing the same recommended motors. And now they're only showing 1,700 feet. So it's interesting that in a few decades that the altitude has decreased somewhat. But really the main difference that I'm going to show you in this build is we're going to build the rocket per specs, but instead of painting it, I'm going to be using my Monocoat method just to give a little shinier gleam finish to it. And we may elect to put some clear coat over it once I get the decals on, but we'll see when we get to that point. But the build's going to be standard, and more than likely going to put a parachute in there instead of the streamer that comes with it. I like to run 6-inch parachutes instead, just to make the landing a little bit softer based on the fact that I fly off kind of a hard rocky terrain, so my landings can be kind of brutal if they hit too hard. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the unbagging of the new Yankee here. Now this is listed as a skill level 1, which is a basic beginner's kit. It does involve cutting, gluing, sanding, you know, all the basic building skills that are required. But once you get those down, it'll be easier to move up to the higher skill levels. But let's go ahead and cut into this and see what we have in the kit. We'll leave the face card there on the side. And first and foremost, you see the beautiful decals there. Pretty simple. You got the 3 red stripes and the 2 Yankee emblems that'll go up on the nose. Here's the instructions. We'll go over those here in a bit. Here's just the material that they give you to read all the safety warnings. Here's our engine spacer, our body tube, our plastic nose cone, and our streamer and shock cord, and our balsa wood that will be used for the fins, our thrust ring, and our nose cone insert. And I will be doing slight modifications to that as well, and I'll show that to you when we get to that point. But let me show you what's all in here. Yeah, there's our insert, and they give you 2 pieces of wood to make your fins out of. And again, the streamer and the rubber band, I'm probably going to elect to use a different rubber and a parachute system, so probably set that aside. But let's quickly look through the manual, make sure we do have everything. One thing I didn't see was the launch lug. Did I misplace that, or is it in here? You know what, it is. I feel it. Yeah, I'm gonna have to open this bag anyhow. Okay, so we've got the yellow spacer tube, check. 2 pieces of balsa, the engine block, the launch lug is in this bag here, the body tube, the insert, the nose cone, and that's it. So pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and pull that launch lug out of there, and then we'll set the rest of this bag aside. All I want is the launch lug. There it is. We'll set that right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with step one and start building. Okay, the first thing I want to do is involving paint, because once we get the paint on, then it can do the drawing process while we proceed with the build. Although step one does involve gluing the insert into the nose cone. However, I don't do that until after it's painted. That way I don't get, I don't want to risk getting any paint on this, want a nice clean finish. However, I'm going to do something different with this insert that I will show you in the next step. And again, that's after this is painted. So I'm going to set this aside for now, and I'll show you what I do to modify those. But because I told you I'm going to be monocoating the body tube with this blue monocoat, I wanted to find the closest match I could in blue to paint the plastic nose cone. And I found that Tamiya X4 blue pretty much matches the monocoat blue. So is it going to be perfect? No, but good enough for my purposes. So let's go ahead and head over to the paint booth and let's get this shot with airbrush real quick, and then we'll come back to building the rocket. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the nose cone insert. Now, as many of you who watch my channel know, I love to fly with the Flight Sketch mini altimeters on board, and even in the smaller 18 millimeter body tubes, there's a way to fit the altimeter in without jeopardizing clogging up the tube and preventing the chute from ejecting, and that's by putting the altimeter up into the nose cone, which actually also helps out with the stability by adding a little bit more nose weight. So what I'd like to do is, before I glue this into the nose cone, I take the insert and I drill 2 small holes just on one flat edge here on the side, and those 2 holes I'll be able to wrap a Kevlar cord through there and make a loop, and that's what I can attach the shock cord, the parachute, and the altimeter to. And once I get those 2 holes drilled, I literally cut off the entire other 2/3 of this nose cone. So really all you have is this one like crescent moon shape that goes into the nose cone. So let me show you how I do that. I'll go ahead and go into the drill press, drill 2 16th inch holes, and then with my Dremel cutoff tool I'm going to cut off the remainder, and you'll see what's left of the nose cone insert. Okay, so now we're going to proceed with cutting away the remainder of the insert that we do not need. So you can see the 2 16th inch holes we drilled there. Now, the quickest way to get that little hook off is I just take a pair of wire cutters, clip those off, and that'll make dremeling a lot easier. So then I'm simply gonna, let me just hold on to this with a pair of needle nose pliers, and we're going to cut on the left edge of that opening, so there's minimal amount of plastic left over. So using my Dremel cutoff wheel, okay, there we have it. Okay, now we'll just sort of clean up that edge with an X-Acto to remove all the flashing that's created. Okay, so there we have it. This is all that's going to go into the nose cone now. Like I said, just run some Kevlar cord through this, tie a knot on the bottom side so that's not in the way of anything. So then you just have a little loop sticking out, and then this will get cemented into the plastic into the nose cone. And that way the diameter that's remaining here, that's open, is wide enough for the Flight Sketch Mini altimeter to slide down and into the nose cone itself. So that's my technique, and it's worked out pretty well for me, so I'm going to stick with it. So let's go ahead and move on now to the next step, which will be building the fins. Okay, so here we are on to the next step. We're going to be making the 3 fins that go on the body tube. Now what I like to do is I like to keep the original manual intact. I don't like to cut into it and tear it up. So what I do is I just simply photocopy it, and that way I get a copy of my fin template, as also my fin and launch slug guide that I'll cut out in a little while. So let's go ahead and cut this out and then trace that pattern onto the balsa sheets, and we'll get those cut right out. So I just simply take an X-Acto knife, and you can use a pair of scissors too. I just do this just to be a little bit more precise. One more cut. And there we have it. So there is our fin pattern. Now I'm simply going to take I use a mechanical pencil just because it's a little bit sharper, and I'm just going to take that and trace this onto the balsa sheet. Now the directions do say the grain line should go vertically in this direction, vertically with, well, it's actually the fin sits this way in relation to the rocket body, so it's kind of a 45-degree angle to the body tube. But what I like to do is just to simplify things, instead of making 4 different cuts, let's just line 2 sides up with the balsa sheet, and that way we only have to make 2 cuts. Okay. So there's one faint fin, but it's there. You know, you actually could do all 3, it looks like, in one sheet. So they give you 2 sheets, but let's just go ahead and make this work. Okay. I'm just going to draw some marks where the points actually go. That makes things a little bit easier. And then, yeah, look at that. It absolutely fits 3 fins. So I just need to mark this corner right there. And there we have it. So let me take my straight edge, and I'm going to make 1 cut to this corner. So there we have it. We've got 3 fins, just like so. Now they're actually pretty close to being equal on their own. But what I want to do now is simply, it's amazing they give you 2 sheets when you only need 1. I'm going to get a sanding block and sand those up. So give me 1 second, I'll be right back. Okay, now that I got a sanding block, what I like to do is just pinch all 3 fins together and run them along the sanding block. Instead of trying to run the sanding block along those fins, just run the fins along the block. Okay. And just make sure you keep a strong, firm hold on them so they don't slip. So as you twist them, make sure you're pinching hard. And one more side here. There we go. So now all 4 sides are exactly evenly sanded and mated. So there you go. There are our 3 completed fins. Okay, the next step I'm going to do is monocoating the body tube. And again, this is definitely stepping aside from the directions, whereas they call for paint, as they should. But I've been experimenting with monocoating my previous rockets, and I've had some good success. Now, monocoating is a technique that if you don't know how to do it already, I wouldn't necessarily do it on your first rocket build. Practice, get some balsa wood, practice monocoating, running shapes, forms, different angles. But basically what monocoat is, it's a plastic film that has a peel-off backing on it, and it's not sticky. It's not sticky, but when you heat it up with the iron, which is what we have right here, it melts the adhesive on the backside, and then it makes it stick to whatever you're putting it on. And I have had good success. Cardboard isn't the easiest thing to monocoat, but it does work given a high enough temperature. And then once we wrap the monocoat around and end up actually overlapping, which means we're putting monocoat on top of monocoat, that's where you get the best seal. Monocoat on monocoat is a fantastic adhesion right there. So if it's not sticking to the cardboard right away, that's okay. As long as you get it wrapped around to itself and make that good strong bond at that point, you're good. So I've got a strip of white pre-cut and blue. In case you're wondering what width you need, this is a BT20 tube, and just so you know, if you were to cut your monocoat to 2.5 to 2 5/8 inches, that gives you about a 1/4 inch overlap. So if you did 2.5, you'd have an 1/8 of an inch overlap, but I've got a little bit more than that. But 2.5 to 2 5/8 is a good starting point to cut your width to be able to wrap all the way around. Now, looking at the picture, because I want to mimic this as best I can, I want to do a couple things here. One, you always, just like paint, you want to do the lighter colors first and then monocoat the dark, which in this case is blue, over that. Additionally, one of the benefits we have is the dark being in front of the light. You always want to monocoat with the seam going downwind. In other words, I'm going to put the white on first. Right now there's a little lip right there, and air can eventually get underneath that and lift. But if you get the blue and wrap it over and then you put it over the white, there's no more seam anymore. The seam is on the backside, so the airflow going this way is no way possible going to lift that white up. So you always want to do the back of the rocket and work your way forward, as well as lighter colors to darker colors. Now, I would prefer the directional, let's say the design had the white in the front and the blue in the back. I would not do the white first and then the blue, because I would rather have a little discoloration through the monocoat than a mechanical or aerodynamic issue with this hitting the airflow. So in that case, I would do the darker color first. But in this case, we're fortunate that the white comes first. Now the question is, how far do I go down? Well, looking at the face card here, it looks like the Yankee decal is pretty well centered in the blue. So to get an idea, I do have the decals here, so we want to set that kind of more or less where it's going to be on the tube. I'd say right about there. And then the white is going to be about here. Now, you want to go a little forward on the white because you got to create that overlap with the blue. So let me I'm going to set the white right here. So I'm just going to mark it with pencil. So that's where I'm going to have the white go up to. So let's go ahead and peel off the backing, and I'll show you how we do this. Again, it's not sticky, not tacky, nothing. It's pretty flimsy and thin. So, and be careful it doesn't wrap around and touch itself, because in hot climates that actually could bond. But for now we're okay. So now I'm just going to wrap this around the tube, and I'm going to take it up to that little pencil line we made right there. Right there. And then you want to wrap it around and make sure your lines meet up at the other side. Just like so. Okay? Now you take your iron, and I'm just going to start by pressing it down in one spot. And then just wrapping it around. And I went ahead and let it open up, but it's already sticking, so that's a good thing. I'm going to keep rolling it. Now we're at the junction here, so I'm going to just roll it, lift that up, roll that down, and then bring this other one around to it. And this is where we get our strong adhesion right there. Monocoat on monocoat. Okay, now the back end, a little tricky. The key to monocoating is working the air bubbles out. So you want to push and slide. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack down all the perimeter, and then I'm going to actually go over the tube with the heat gun, and that will shrink up the tubing. I'm sorry, shrink up the monocoat around the tubing, and alleviating any possibility of air bubbles. So that's kind of our goal there. So let me tack that down. Okay. I'm just going to lightly run the iron over that seam. And if you get some wrinkles, that's okay initially, because the heat gun will take them out. But I'm not actually pushing the monocoat into the cardboard yet. I'm just letting the heat kind of shrink it up to the point where I can then put it down without any wrinkles. Like right here, we're getting a little bit of wrinkles. I'm not sure if the glare might be a little hard to see. Yeah, right there, we're getting a little bit of wrinkles. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to push it down to the cardboard. I'm just going to simply slide it over and over and over until the wrinkles disappear. Then I'll push it onto the cardboard. And if you feel like a wrinkle is going to be permanent, you want to stop, and at that point I'll hit that with the gun, the heat gun, and that'll stretch it out. Now I want to seal the perimeter down at this end of the tube, so I'm just going to simply kind of roll this over the edge. And when all is said and done, I will run a glue bead around the base to help secure that to the tube. But that'll be after we trim it off. So I'm just running this around. Just twisting as I go. And we've already got this end done. So now what I want to do is just take my heat gun, and first I want to work out that wrinkle. And you don't want to leave the gun in one spot for too long. There we go. The wrinkle's gone. Now, since the whole perimeter of the tube is sealed, I can just simply tighten this down with the gun. I'm getting some curling at the end there, which is fine because that's all going to get trimmed off. Actually, it actually is a good thing. It'll help cinch off and bind off that end. So now that the whole thing is tight down to the cardboard, now I take the iron and I just press it down hard to the tube, which will help secure that adhesion. Okay, there we go. Now, you're probably thinking, now how are you going to glue the fins on? Well, when it comes to that point, we will be, with our very sharp X-Acto, we'll be cutting out some openings, exposing the cardboard so the fin can then glue directly onto the cardboard. And then the area around that will be filled in with the epoxy that we're going to use as a fillet. So that'll cover that up. Now we move on to the blue. Now, again, I'm going to use my decal just to make sure we've got plenty of space here. We do. That's gonna be about perfect. So take off the blue backing. Okay. Now, just to be consistent, I'm gonna line up the seams as close as I can to the seam on the original piece. Turn it this way. You know what? That was the wrong piece. Sorry about that. That was my scrap leftover. I was gonna say that didn't fit right. This is the one that I had cut right. Okay. There we go. Much better. I kind of got nervous there for a second. Okay, so let me make sure that this is going to fit the decal. See, the end is right there. Oh, that's gonna be about perfect right there. So now let me find that seam of the white. Again, I'm just drawing this in to get that seam line perfect and matched up. There we go. Now, very carefully, I'm going to let that open up, but seal this down to the white. Okay, that creates a nice strong bond right there. Okay, before I go any further, let's just make sure we still have our alignment, which we do. Okay. Okay, I'm going to seal that. Okay, so there we have the initial completion of the body tube. Now we have this left over, so that's as simple as taking your X-Acto knife and just cutting into it, and then follow all the way around the perimeter. Again, this is where a super sharp blade is key. So there you have it. Nice clean end. go down to the white. Do the same thing. Okay, there we have it. So there's our completed body tube. No paint required. And it's about as shiny and clean as you're going to get. So that's how you monocoat a rocket body tube. Okay, the next stage of monocoating is the fins. Now the balsa fins are relatively easy to monocoat because monocoat adheres very well to the balsa wood. You can sand it if you like. Monocoat does a good job of concealing the grains of the wood, whereas paint tends to seep in and really show and present those grains. But I've had really good luck with just monocoating, if maybe just at all, just a light sanding with some very fine grit. But for the most part, I'm just going to leave it as is. Now the instructions do call for rounding the leading edge, which would actually be this edge here. Is that right? Yes. But I'm going to forgo that. To me, I just don't see it's a little more time consuming and makes monocoating a little trickier, and the benefits I just don't see are worth it. So I'm just going to keep the leading edge squared off. They're thin to begin with. And what I did was I went ahead and pre-cut a bunch of, I'd say they're about 2 inches by, let's see, by 3.5, 2 by 3.5 inch strips. That's enough to cover each side. And I'm going to cover up one fin and show you how I do it, and then I'll do the other 2 off camera. But just as before, you simply remove the backing. Not the easiest thing to do, but there we go. Okay. I'm going to lay this down on there just to get it pretty well centered, like so. And then very carefully pinching it and flipping it over. I'm just going to lay the iron on the wood and just press down to get a nice strong adhesion. So you can already see it's actually curling the edges a little bit around the edge of the wood. So once I get that down nicely, I'm going to flip it back over. Now this is where this becomes a little tedious. Now one thing to keep in mind, this edge right here, I am not going to wrap the monocoat around because that's the exposed edge I want to glue directly to the cardboard tube. So we're not going to, in fact, well, I'll show you what I'll do in a minute, but at all the angles though, I want to draw a line with the knife out from those angles, like right there. Now, with that, I'm just going to use the fin as a template, and I'm going to slice off that remainder right there. So now I'm reminded not to monocoat that edge. Now what I like to do with the edges is, once I get them down, just basically roll it over with the iron. Just roll it over. Now what's going to happen is when you do that, you're going to get corners that need to be trimmed. Now this is where it gets real tedious. Down in each corner, you just want to run a little slip of the knife, and then take scissors and trim off most of it, but leave enough. These aren't the best scissors, so I'm just gonna have to use my knife. There we go. You want to overlap that little piece. See, just that little itty bitty piece right there. You want to overlap it. And we'll go ahead and trim this piece off here. Use the blade, the fin as a guide, and just run your knife along as such. There you go. Now you got a nice edge. Just kind of finish it off by rolling it. Now, that little overlapped piece that I tucked in is going to get sandwiched in between this edge piece here that overlaps. So I'm going to roll that over, just like I did before. Roll it over, and then cut those two little corners. Okay. And same as before, just going to iron that little corner piece down to the wood. Okay. And trim this edge off here. I'm actually already starting to get a little dullness in this blade, so after this fin, I'm going to run and get a new fresh blade to finish off this and the other fins with. Okay. All right. So now it's just a matter of overlapping one more time. Okay. Okay. That was a nice clean cut. Okay. There we have it, and just kind of go back over all three sides. Trim off the corner of this nose piece here. Okay. And there you go. There's the nice reveal. There is your perfectly monocoated red fin. I'm going to do the same thing to this side, and then when I do it and it wraps it over the edges, remember what I said, monocoat on monocoat is the best adhesion, so that's going to completely seal the wood within the monocoat. And again, I'm going to leave this edge exposed because that's going to be the end that glues directly to the exposed cardboard in the tube. So there's an idea of what it's going to look like color-wise. It's coming together really nicely and rather quickly. So the Yankee's starting to look good. Again, I'm going to go ahead and do these off camera. Okay, moving right along here. Before I get into the next step, I want to show you how the fins came out after monocoating them. They came out just fine. Both sides came out good, and then after I finished monocoating them, I took each fin and I took off approximately 1/16 of an inch or so off the base where it's going to glue onto the rocket. That gives me some purchase area, so when I run my fillets, the glue will not be sticking to the monocoat, but will actually stick and absorb more into the wood. So I exposed the wood on the root end of all three of those fins just for the fillet purposes. So that being said, now we're moving on to the thrust ring, which is going to mount in the aft section of the tube. Now the instructions call for 1/4 inch of the motor to be sticking out the back end of the tube. So what you want to do is take your yellow spacer you got and just mark off 1/4 inch from one end. Right there. Let me extend that line a little bit. Okay, so that's going to be our reference mark as to how far in we push the thrust ring. Now you're probably looking at the thrust ring going, what on earth is going on there? Well, I do things a little bit differently. I don't prefer the paper shock mount that glues to the inside of the body tube. I like to use Kevlar cord. In fact, this is 100-pound Kevlar cord that I'm going to anchor to the thrust ring at the aft of the tube, and then it'll run up the tube toward the front, and right about maybe 1/2 inch shy of the top, I'm going to have a loop, and at that loop is where I'll tie my rubber band for the shock cord. But I don't want this extending out the tube because that could cause a rip on ejection. It could tear the cardboard up. So, but first and foremost, I've got to anchor the cord to the thrust ring. So what I did off camera, you might be able to see, I cut a little notch on the outer and the inner, and you notice the inner is a little offset because I didn't want too thin of a section between the two notches. So I offset them a little bit, but that's going to be the notch that the cord actually fits into, so it won't create a bulge in the body tube. And then on one end, this end here, I cut a little bit in because that's going to be the end that the motor pushes up against. So I wanted to create more of a flush surface for the motor to seat up against. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a double knot on this. What I'm going to do though is add a little bit of glue into that joint. Just as I tie the knot, it'll help just kind of hold things in place. Let me just put some wood glue here on a toothpick, which is a lot more precise than just throwing it on there. So let me just kind of fill in that gap, the inner, the outer, and that little gap on the outer part there. Okay, and then I'm just going to oops, I'm going to not drop is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring it around and I'm going to seat it into that gap. Like so. And I want the knot on the forward end of the tube. There we go. Just like so. And then I'm going to double knot it. Okay. And then let me grab a Q-tip. Just to help clean up that inside. We don't want buildup of glue. Okay. And then also I'm going to put just a tab of glue on the knot itself, just to help it from ever coming undone. Just kind of smear it around the knot. There we go. So now, upon ejection, the shock cord is going to take the brunt of the blast and pull, but it's not going anywhere because it's anchored to the thrust ring, which is going to be anchored solidly to the inside of the body tube. So that's how we do that. Let me just give it one last final snug. And I'm going to set that aside just for a second. Let that dry a little bit more for us. And looking back at the body tube, I've got my spacers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the thrust ring in here, and I'm going to push it in with the spacer all the way up to the mark that we made. Right to that point, and at that point I'm quickly going to remove this so this doesn't get glued in there. And then we're going to let that sit, and that's what's going to hold the motor from going any further up the body tube. Okay, this next step is a little quirky, and you'll probably notice that I've got some odd things going on here. But what I have decided to do is, prior to inserting the thrust ring, you are to run a bead of glue, which is a common build, at the same distance that the thrust ring is going to be. Well, if I do that with the shock cord going the direction it's supposed to, the shock cord is going to run through the glue, and I don't want to get glue on the shock cord. So what I've decided to do is route the shock cord back through the thrust ring, through the spacer tube, out the back. So this way I can go ahead and insert this without any chance of getting glue on the shock cord. Then I can simply remove this, slide it out from inside the tube, and we're good to go. And then I can reverse the direction of the shock cord out the front once the glue is set up. So what I want to do is I want to make a mark on my stick here at roughly the same distance that we need to apply the glue, so I'll know how far to run it up the tube. Right at that mark there. So what I need to do is basically just run my finger to the end of the tube and route it that way. So let's go ahead and get it inserted. And this is a kind of a quick operation. You only get one shot at it, so we got to be kind of swift and clean and quick about it. So bear with me here as I perform this. Put one more application. Okay, that should be good. Looking, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but there is in fact a ring of glue down in there. Okay, I'm going to insert the thrust ring. I'm going to get it started. And then take the spacer and then just push it up to that line. There it is. Stop and pull this out. And I'm going to feed the cord back through it. There we go. Okay, now we're just going to let that sit for a few seconds, or probably a few minutes, and harden, and then I can feed the shock cord back up through the center of the thrust ring out the nose. So we're going to let that sit for a few minutes. Okay, the next step is a little tricky, and you know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I could try to explain this, or I could just show you what I'm doing. So, as you can see, the shock cord is sticking out the aft end of the motor tube. The thrust ring has dried inside, so I can safely pass this through now. And yeah, there you go. You can see it there in the light. There's the thrust ring in there. So I'm going to pass this through. And once I'm able to retrieve it, there we go. I'm going to pull it all the way through. There we go. Okay, now the shock cord is faced in the right direction. Now, like I said earlier, you don't want the Kevlar sticking out beyond the end of the tube, because upon ejection, if it snags on this rim of cardboard, it can easily rip it and tear it. So I want the elastic part of the shock cord to be at the rim, which means I've got to put a little loop in the shock cord, maybe half inch, at least a half inch down here. I want to put a loop. And that way, in the future, if the elastic ever burns through, I can simply attach new elastic through that loop. Now, the question is, where do I put that loop? Well, so I'm going to pull it a little tight, and I'm going to make a mark with a Sharpie on the Kevlar down about where we want it. There, I made a nice visible black mark. Okay, now that I know where the end of the loop needs to be, we need to take the end of the shock cord once again and route it back through the tube, and we're going to tie the knot on the aft end of the rocket, because the aft end will be able to reach it. So pull that back through, and there is our black mark. Not sure if you can see it. So there's our black mark. We want to tie our loop. So I'm going to go a little beyond it, because when you tie this knot, you lose a little bit of length in the process. So simply just going to loop this around. Pass that through. And pull our knot. There we go. So there's the loop that the elastic band will always be able to have access to. So in the future, I can always cut off the elastic band and attach a new one to that loop if need be. So now, I simply want to cut this off. And I'm going to cover that with a little bit of wood glue, just to keep the knot, or the strands of the Kevlar from fraying on me. You can never have too many toothpicks in your toolbox. Okay, now I'm just gonna kind of coat the end with some wood glue. You can use white glue. CA, I could use CA glue or super glue, but it tends to get hard as rock, and I want a little bit of flexibility just in that, because this is going to be moving and shaking inside the rocket pretty violently. Okay, so let me just kind of wipe off the excess, but the most of it's already kind of made its way in. Okay. Now, I would take a long rod or a pencil or something and run that back through, but you don't do it until after you attach your rubber shock cord. But we're not going to do that just yet, because we've still got to mount our fins and do some more work on the rocket. But I wanted to get this operation done and out of the way. In fact, for the time being, I can just tuck this into the tube, out of sight, out of mind, and we won't worry about it. I can fish it out with a hook later. And now I can go ahead and attach the fins and the launch lug. So, okay, I've done some prep work here to show you how we're going to cut out the slots for the fin placement. I took the fin alignment guide that I cut out of the instructions earlier, wrapped it around the body tube, and taped it in place. And I simply used the arrows to line up 3 positions around the diameter of the tube that are going to be the center line of our fins. Our fins measured exactly 1 11/16 from aft to fore end of the fin, and because I want to build that fillet around it, I allowed for an extra 1/16 inch ahead of it. So I ended up marking with this round tape around the leading edge of the fin exactly 1 3/4 inch from the root of the tube. So that's as far as we're going to cut, and then I'm going to cut approximately 1/16 of an inch on either end of the center line to allow for a groove to glue it onto and then create the fillets with. So now that I've got the dimensions drawn on the tape, I'm actually going to use this rather cool tool that Estes makes, a tube alignment guide, and I'm going to use it as a base to cut from. So I'm just going to line that up, set this along the edge, and then run my cut. Make a few passes. It's got to get through the tape and then ultimately the monocoat. Of course, I don't want to go too deep, because then I'm going to be cutting into the cardboard. Okay. Now I will recreate again later another center line on that. I just had to create the space for the fin to fit initially, and then I'll redraw again the center line. Alright, so that's one. I'm just going to go ahead and speed you through the process here of doing the other 2. Okay, now we've got our body tube cut out for the fin placement. We've got the slots opened up, and I redrew new center lines on the cardboard itself, which will give us a reference point for centering our fins on the tube. And that little extra that you see wrapped around, that is to allow for the fillets. So we'll have some purchase there. So there we have it. Now we're all set. We can go ahead and glue these on, and I'll do the launch lug in the same way I did the fins. And we're just about done. Okay, now we're ready to glue the fins on the body tube. I'm going to use a combination of wood glue. That's going to be the main adhesive, but I'm also going to tack it with a little bit of CA glue, super glue, just on either end to hold it while the wood glue sets up. So what I want to do is take the fin and run a small bead of glue along the root of the fin. And it doesn't take much. In fact, I'm going to smear most of it off. But let me smear that on, just get a full coverage, kind of push it into the pores of the wood. Okay, and always have a paper towel handy. You're going to have to wipe your fingers off frequently. And the key to this is you set it on there, but then you immediately remove it. And you'll see what I mean here in a second. You set it on the center line, and then you remove it. And what you do is you let that sit for 30 to 60 seconds, and it becomes tackier, so then when you put it back down again, it'll hold itself more in position, which will give me time to apply just a dab or two of the CA glue. Okay, it's been about 30 seconds, so now I'm going to permanently affix this to the tube, right on that center line that I drew. And looking down the tube to verify it is in fact straight. And see, that tackiness allows it to hold itself while I do my final checks. Everything does look good. So I'm going to apply just a small dab of glue to the front. Not much, just a dab. And I'm going to spray that with some kicker, and that'll help hold the fin in place while we do the other two. So that's how you do it. Now, because we're going to run stronger fillets down the side later, I'm going to run a wet Q-tip along and just kind of wipe off any extra glue. That kind of cleans things up and prepares the side area better for a future fillet. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on the other two fins, and we'll catch up back with you when I'm done with that. Okay, quick update. I've got the fins completely dried now with the wood glue and the dabs of CA, but now it's time to finish it off and really strengthen it with the fillets. I'm going to be using some epoxy mixed with some white acrylic that's going to match the white body tube. Additionally, you can see I got the launch lug glued on. I did the same thing I did with the fins. I just cut out in the proper placement the monocoat so it would adhere directly to the cardboard tube itself. And I just glued that in, let that sit with CA glue. And so my next step is going to be running fillets on both the fins and the launch lug. So I'm going to do this off camera, but I'm going to take some Tamiya tape and I'm going to tape off the fins where I don't want the fillet to go, obviously. So let me go ahead and do that off camera, and then we'll come back and we'll do the fillets. Oh, and you can see I did the decals too. Pretty nice, huh? Okay, we've got our epoxy mix up, and I tinted it with some white acrylic paint to give it some color. And what we're going to do now is just using a popsicle stick, run our fillet along the fillet line. And I debated whether or not I should run a strip of tape on the body tube itself, but then I was running into issues with the launch lug being in the way. So I'm just going to be very careful because it's white. Hopefully it won't be too bad, and I can clean it up with some alcohol and Q-tips if it spreads beyond what I want it to. So let's go ahead and show you how I do it. I'll do the first fin on camera, and then I'll do the remaining off camera just to save some time, but just to show you how I run my fillets. Just kind of work it in there, and that is way too much. Like way too much. But then you simply take a popsicle stick and draw it down, and there's a perfect fillet right there. Now again, I'm going to go back and clean that up with some Q-tips and alcohol, but you get the idea. And I'll In fact, I'll use this clump that was left over, and I'll put it on this side. There we go, just like that. Okay, so here we have it. We are nearing the finish line, and what I want to show you now is, first of all, I want to show off how well matched the Monocoat is to the paint on the nose cone. I mean, up close, yeah, there's a difference, but on camera it's not as bad. In person you can see the difference a little bit more, but not a big deal whatsoever. From 5 feet away, it's perfect. But for this next step, I'm going to set the rocket aside. I'm going to take the nose cone out, which, by the way, sits in there absolutely perfectly snug. It's not going to require any sanding or adding of masking tape whatsoever. It fits in with the right amount of pressure. So, but what we need to do is now glue in the insert that we had prepared previously. If you remember, I glued the two 16th-inch holes and then cut off the majority of that insert. And I'll show you why. When we do glue this in, which we'll do here in a minute, you can see how much open area there is into the nose cone. And the reason I do that is because I like to use the Flight Sketch mini altimeters. And if done correctly, this altimeter will fit right into that little opening. Now, because of the conical shape of this particular nose cone, it doesn't go in quite as deep as some of the other nose cones do. But from a side shot there, you can see how far in it goes, and it basically kind of anchors itself to the nose cone, so you're no longer shoving this down the rocket body tube, which could get snagged and prevent the parachute from coming out. But because it's attached to the nose cone, when the nose cone ejects, it's going to pull the altimeter with it. Really nice feature. And of course, my altimeters have the little snap link here that'll get clipped to the tether, which we're going to do in the very next step. So let me slide the altimeter out, but you can see how well that fits in the 18mm size nose cones. BT20 body tube, basically. So before I glue this in, though, I want to attach our Kevlar loop, and I've taken maybe a 3 or 4 inch strand of Kevlar here, and I coated the ends with just a dab of thin CA so they won't open up on me. And I'm simply just going to run them through from the top side, like so. And then I'm just going to run like a double knot, not a double, just a single, but I'm going to loop it over itself and create a loop. Like so. That will be used to anchor everything. So once that's in, I'm going to trim off this excess. But then you can just pull the loop out the top, and you can see now you've got an anchor point for your altimeter, your shock cord, your parachute. Everything can anchor off of this tethered loop here. So now that I've got that fairly well tightened, I'm going to grab a pair of scissors, cut this off like so. And as you know, I always like to cover my knots with just a dab of wood glue. Okay, and then I just kind of use my finger, kind of help wick it into the threads, get a little bit on the knot so it keeps it from coming undone. And we're just gonna let that hang out like that for the time being. The next step is the nose cone and that insert being glued with some CA, or not CA, plastic cement. Now, one thing I want to do is I do want to roughen up the inside just a little bit with some, I guess this is 220 sandpaper, just to give it a little more purchase. And then just a little bit on the ring. Just to scuff it up. Nothing major. Okay. Then what we want to do, you always want to take your cement and you want to put it on, we'll call it the female end, because if you put it on the male end of anything, as you plug it in, it's going to actually ooze out of the sides. But if you put it on the inside of this part, as I push the insert in, if there's any oozing of the cement, it's going to go toward the front and it's not going to come out the seam at all, which will make for a much cleaner visual, and it, you know, nothing to sand off or anything either. So much better way to do it that way. So with that in mind, set that aside. Just going to run a thin little bead of glue. Again, this is Testor's model cement, and what it does is it actually microscopically it melts the plastic. So when you bond the two halves, they melt together, and they basically become one. That's how that works. Okay, so now that I've got the glue, I'm just going to set this in there. And just kind of snug it in, give it a little twist. I'm going to pull this out of the way of the glue. So there you have it. Now I'm just going to let this sit. See, there's no seepage, nice clean fit. So we're just going to let this sit and dry. And yeah, when we're done, she'll be hard as rock, it'll be one piece, and we'll be good to go. Okay, so obviously I've done a little bit of work off camera, but I want to show you the completed project. The Yankee is done, it's ready to fly, and I will show you what I did off camera just to get you up to speed so you didn't miss any steps. You did notice the last film I did the fillets, and I went over, I actually masked off the fins and some of the body, and I went over the fillet with some white paint. The paint mixture I had in the epoxy wasn't white enough, and it kind of had a milky color to it, so I wanted to get it a little more bright white. So I painted the fillets and also right there on the launch lug as well. Probably getting a glare off the light, but anyway, so the aft end is done. Up front, you can tell the nose cone came out really nice, matching the Monocoat. I was really pleased with that. But if you notice, there's a hole right here under the E, and then there's another one right there, and then a third one right there. Those are the vent holes for the altimeter. That's going to be right around in this area. And what it does is it equalizes the air pressure inside the rocket, so as it ascends on flight, it will accurately read the air pressure because the inside pressure matches the outside pressure. But let me go ahead and pull the nose cone off and show you the inner workings of everything here. So you did see me do the insert with the Kevlar cord. I do have a snap swivel now connected to a braided elastic. I get this at Walmart. It's rubber elastic just like that comes in the kit, except this is braided, so I think it helps it hold up a little bit better. And that wasn't a knot, it just looked like a knot. But then as you can see down the tube, that's where our loop is at. And if at any point in the future this starts to wear out and or deteriorate, I can simply run it back out the aft end, snip it off the loop, and then attach new rubber to the loop, and then feed it back up through the nose, and you're all set to go again. So that's really all there is to it. The rocket, like I said, is done, and hopefully we'll get a flight here pretty soon. In fact, by the time this video comes out, you may have already seen one. I don't know how quickly I'll get this edited and put out, but anyway, the rocket is done. And I cannot wait. I haven't weighed it yet. Maybe I'll do a weight before the flight just to give you some feedback on it. But it is super light. Monocoat is just a all-around excellent material because it gives you the same effect as paint, but it weighs, oh gosh, probably less than half of what the paint weighs. Plus, you know, you're not dealing with the primer, you're not dealing with the base coats, you're not dealing with the clear coat over top of that. So that's at least 3 to 4 coats minimum of paint you're missing by just doing one layer of thin plastic Monocoat. So This isn't how I actually pack my shock cord. I'm just doing this for purposes of getting it back together. But like I said, my favorite thing about building these little rockets is running the altimeter up in the nose cone, because it frees up so much space in the body. Because you got to remember, the motor takes up this space here. Then you've got your wadding, which is probably up to here. And then you've got the rest of this for your parachute and your shock cord. It doesn't give you a whole lot of room, and the more stuff you jam down that tube, the more likely it's going to get snagged and won't eject properly. So by putting the nose cone, by putting the altimeter up in the nose cone, really frees up that space. And like I said, the altimeter cannot get snagged on the inside cardboard either. To let you know how I do these holes, what I do is I take the same fin guide that I use to mark the location of the fins, I wrap it around the tube, and then that gives me my 3 points on a level platform. You notice all 3 holes are in perfect alignment with each other because I went off that fin guide. And then I simply take a little 1/16 inch drill bit with my hand, and I just slowly work it through the cardboard, and then I take a piece of sandpaper and sand the inside of the tube, all that little leftover cardboard that's sticking out inside of the body, kind of sand that flush. I put a drop of thin CA glue in the holes so the Monocoat at the hole seals to the cardboard, because if you don't, there's a chance that air could eventually start to lift the Monocoat up away from the cardboard. So kind of sealing that hole with glue and then running the drill bit back through again once it's dry. So that really is all there is to it. Rather simple build. I know I complicated it because I like to do extra things, customize things, but if you just build it per the instructions and build it stock, you could build it half the time that I did. So with that, I'm going to call this build a wrap. Thanks for following along and watching, and hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned some stuff. And if you have any feedback, please leave a comment. Let me know any ideas that, you know, I've built a lot of these, but I'm always open to new ideas and suggestions. No one has ever perfected the art of building a model rocket yet. So with that, I'm going to end this series. Thanks again for watching. Keep your eyes open for my flight videos. I call them launch days. And yeah, we'll see this one in the air next video. Thanks a lot.